Please welcome to the stage, from Litterati, a movement that's crowdsourcing cleaning for the planet. Founder of Litterati, Jeff Kirsch.
On stage to get jiggy with it. That's a first. My story begins with these two. I know, right? These are my kids. And we were hiking through the Oakland woods when my daughter Tali noticed this plastic tub of cat litter sitting in a creek. And she looked at me and said, "Daddy, that doesn't go there." It was this really innocent comment from a 4-year-old, but it was an eye-opening moment for me. And when she said that, it reminded me of when I was a kid. I used to go to summer camp. And on the morning of visiting day, just before they'd let our anxious parents come barreling through the gates, the camp director would say, "Quick, everybody go pick up 5 pieces of litter." So now you get a couple hundred kids. We're each picking up 5 pieces. And within a few minutes, the camp was spotless. And I thought, why not apply that crowdsourced cleanup model to the entire planet? That was the inspiration for starting Litterati. What happened next was a little bit weird. I took a photograph of this cigarette butt using Instagram. There was no rhyme or reason. I had no idea at the time. I just did it. And then I took another photo, and another photo, and another photo. And I noticed 2 things happening. The first was litter suddenly became artistic and therefore approachable. That thing that was on the ground that I either A, didn't notice, or B, wanted nothing to do with, suddenly became a photo op. The second thing I noticed was that at the end of a week, I had 50 or 60 photos on my phone. And I realized I was keeping a record of the positive impact I was having on the planet. The same way we measure the steps we walk or the miles we ride, I was measuring the impact I was having on the planet. No idea what I could do with that, just thought it was kind of interesting, and so I started sharing it with people. And others started using Instagram at the time to photograph these individual pieces of litter, add this hashtag Litterati, and then throw out what they were finding. And one day this photo showed up from China. And this was the moment that I realized Litterati was more than just a bunch of pretty pictures. We were actually becoming a community. And the community was collecting a ton of data. So here's what I mean. Every photo tells a story. We're able to understand who picked up what, because people were tagging. Starbucks, plastic cup, Marlboro, cigarette. There's a geotag that tells us precisely where on the planet that piece of litter was found, and a timestamp indicates where. So the next thing I did was I built a Google map. And when I say I mean I have a friend that knows how to do that kind of thing, and I convinced him to help me build it. And we started plotting the individual points that I was picking up litter. Well, as the community grew, the data grew. My 2 kids went to school right in the bullseye. And I showed this to their teacher. And this woman looked at me and she said, "That's awful." And I said, "Actually, it's worse, because this just represents what a few of us have picked up over the last couple of weeks. The reality is that we're surrounded. We've become desensitized. That's how pervasive this problem is." But I started asking this question, what if we could make the invisible visible? And how might we use technology and data to do that? Well, let me show you. The first group we started working with was cities. San Francisco had this really interesting question. They wanted to understand what percentage of litter came from cigarettes. The reason they wanted that information was to create a tax on all cigarette sales. So years before Litterati existed, the city of San Francisco handed a few people pencils and clipboards. And those folks walked around and did this. That's a cigarette, that's not, that is, that's not, and they came up with a number, a percentage, that drove a 20-cent tax on all cigarette sales. And then the city got sued by guess who? The tobacco industry, who claimed that pencils and clipboards weren't precise nor provable. So I got this phone call from the city who said, "Hey, we heard about Litterati's technology. Can you help us understand the percentage of cigarette litter?" And our technology was literally my Instagram account. And I was like, "Yes, we can." And so we did. 5 days and 5,000 pieces later, our data was used to not only defend, but double the tax, which now generates about $4 million in annual revenue for the city of San Francisco to clean itself up. During that process, I learned a couple of hard lessons. The first was Instagram, wrong tool. So we built an app that anybody can download today and become part of this solution. From that, I learned that when people were picking things up, they started asking us, well, how do we tag things? How should we qualify? How do we make sense of any of this? So I came up with a taxonomy. It's not some scientifically rigorous study. It was just, what's the category, what's the object, what's the material, and what's the brand? And where that got really interesting was we started implementing machine learning into the application recently. So now when you take a photograph, we're starting to apply that taxonomy, the category, the object, the material, and the brand, the moment the photo is snapped. Second thing I learned was that if you think about it, every city in the world has its own unique litter fingerprint. What you see on the streets of San Francisco is very different than what you find in Stockholm or Seoul. And if you could fingerprint San Francisco, well, you might be able to do a place like Amsterdam or Central Park or what I did this morning on my walk here. And if you could generate that kind of meaningful revenue just by understanding the percentage of cigarettes, what about coffee cups, soda cans, candy wrappers, potato chip bags, and on and on and on? How do we all benefit by just becoming a little bit smarter about what's lying beneath our feet? Second group, brands. Downtown Oakland, a couple of members from the Litterati community got together and cleaned up this block. They picked up 1,500 pieces in about 45 minutes. It's nothing. And they learned from the data some really interesting things. Most of the litter came from Taco Bell. It's not a huge insight because there's only one thing on that block, which is a Taco Bell. But they looked further into the data, and they learned that most of the Taco Bell litter were their own single-use plastic packets of hot sauce. Deeper look revealed that most of those packets had never even been opened. Now you've got something, right? Now you're getting to the root of the problem. And once you have the root of the problem, it empowers you to pave a path to the solution. So what's a potential solution? Well, how about if you want hot sauce on your taco, you have to order it. Or maybe they install bulk dispensers. Or maybe they come up with more sustainable forms of packaging. Not to mention the economic loss. So the skeptic in the crowd says, well, how much is that pack really worth? Well, I don't know, maybe it's a penny in sauce and a penny in plastic. But that was 1,500 pieces on one particular day at one particular location. What happens when you multiply that by the thousands of other locations they have and then scale that to just a year? How does Taco Bell take an environmental hazard, turn it into an economic engine, and become an industry hero? Next group, schools. Group of fifth graders, they picked up 1,247 pieces of litter just on their schoolyard. And these kids learned from the data that the most common type of litter on their schoolyard were the plastic straw wrappers from their own cafeteria. So these fifth graders went to their principal and said, why are we still buying straws? And they stopped. It's a great example of how data and technology can lead to an insight that drives an action that is going to have a very positive effect from here on out. And they learned that individually they could make a difference, but together is where we create the impact. Recently, two individuals blew us away. Meet Leslie. So Leslie lives in Northern Ireland and walks this beach every day. Leslie has picked up about 120,000 pieces. Leslie's a bit nuts, but our whole community is a bit nuts, and we believe you have to be if you go after a problem that's this ambitious. So Leslie picks up all this material on her beach, and she learned from the data something very interesting. On the left-hand side of the beach, about half a mile down, is a marina. And what she was finding in the water on her beach were all of these plastic ties. You've seen them. They're about this long. They loop. They're hard. So she went down to the marina. It turns out there's a bunch of sailors. They cinch their yachts with these plastic ties. The minute they're ready to set sail, they snip the ties, off they fall into the water. The current takes them up to the beach. So she went to the marina. They started a campaign outlawing plastic ties, simply because of Leslie. And then there's a guy named Dirk Groot. He's actually built a character on top of Litterati called Zwerfinator. So Dirk started finding these anti-flu plastic wrappers. It's a Dutch cough drop all over Holland. He mobilized the Dutch community. They've picked up 25,000 anti-flu wrappers, but they didn't stop there. They went to the company. They brought an invoice and served it to him and said, here's what you owe us for picking up all your plastic wrappers. To the CEO's credit, he committed to changing the supply chain within 1 year, going from plastic completely to paper, all because Dirk Groot said, I've had enough. This whole thing started because of two little kids in Northern California, and today the Litterati community is in 115 countries. And you know how we're doing it? One piece at a time. Because that much I can do. And so can you, and so can you. And when we all pick up one piece at a time, some pretty amazing things can happen. And if I could sort of impress upon you one particular thought that I think is something we take to heart, and I hope you do with your own projects, it's this. Whatever you're building, it's not about what it is. It really is about what it can become. So we're all here to imagine a better world. It's really about thinking big. We heard that a number of times. So I want to leave you with a couple of lessons that I've learned along the way. Maybe they resonate with you, maybe they don't. Take what you want, leave the others. But here's a few things. When you are dreaming big, to the impossible, you have to trust your gut. Model T Ford. We all know the quote Henry Ford said, if I had asked people what they wanted, they would have told me faster horses. You have to believe that there's something the world needs, even if the world doesn't know it needs it. So imagine you went from a world with all these horses and buggies to suddenly you had cars. It was chaos. Many of you have probably never heard the name William Phelps Eno. He's responsible for things like the stop sign. He found a value in the void. So when everybody is going here, look over here. There's probably something underneath a rock, in a crevice, somewhere around a corner that you never even thought of. There's value in that void. Most importantly, you got to believe, because nobody else is going to if you don't. You have to believe that as one person, you can inspire change and rally others around you to do the same. And you got to be radically honest with yourself. Check all your assumptions. And no matter what, you have to come clean. I was playing tag on the playground with my two kids. Naturally, I was it. My daughter's hanging upside down from the monkey bars. Her shirt has fallen down, covering her face. Her belly's exposed. And I go up to her and give her the wettest, most disgusting, slobberest raspberry right on her belly. And I yell, "Ha ha, you're it." And all of a sudden, I hear a woman say, "What are you doing?" Not my daughter. I could have come up with any excuse in the book, but I sunk to my knees and said, I'm sorry. You got to be honest. No matter how bad you screw up. We heard Byron yesterday talk about falling in love with the problem. I think part of that is you have to listen aggressively. Listen to your customers, listen to your prospective customers, listen to your team, listen to your gut, but listen aggressively. Some of you may have heard the story about the Girl Scout who decided she would set up shop right outside a cannabis dispensary. She sold more boxes of Girl Scout cookies than anybody had, 360 of them in a day. She followed the pain. So when you're building something to tackle the big problems, follow the pain. I think it's important to follow the passion, but follow your pain. Speaking of pain, your path will not be linear. And that's okay. You're going to zig and zag. You just got to keep getting up. Don't worry if the plan A doesn't work or plan B doesn't work. It's normal. It's going to keep happening. And focus. A very dear friend in the crowd recently sent me a book about finding one thing to focus on, and this was the opening lesson I took from it. There's a million things you can do. You got to focus. And in an age where we're getting information thrown at us so fast, you got to find clarity in the confusion. There's a story of a Maasai warrior. He's being chased by lions, and he runs to a cliff, and he jumps, and he stands over it, and it's 3,000 feet down, and lions are approaching, and it's sure death, and he jumps, and he's falling, he gets snagged on a tree 10 feet below the ground. Whew. Snapping crocodiles looking up. Twig starts to crack and creak, and just as he's about to fall, he looks out on the side and sees a strawberry patch, and he plucks one and takes a bite and says, delicious. Can you get quiet in the craze? When you are going after really big problems, you have to find that. It's critical. So back to these two. Every night before I put my kids to bed, I say the same thing. You can be whatever you want. It just takes practice, patience, and a little bit of luck. And one day my daughter says, Daddy, I thought you said it takes practice, patience, and a little bit of love. Whatever you are setting out to do, you got to practice. It doesn't come easy. Be patient. It's going to take time. We all need a little bit of luck. And I hope you, in your soul, love what you're trying to do. And the final thing I would say is this. Don't wait. My best friend of 40 years, a guy I grew up with in Philadelphia, moved in with me about 4 years ago into my home. We had an in-law unit. And one day there's a knock on the door, and it's the paramedics, and they say, who's lying in your garage? And I run downstairs, and there's my buddy lying on the ground, eyes wide, not making a move. Paramedic is strapping an oxygen mask to his face. 45 minutes later, he was dead. The kicker of the story is that the night before, we had celebrated, my two children, my wife, and my friend, with a taco dinner at my house because he had just become what he had spent his entire life trying to become, which was a doctor. Not 24 hours later, and that was it. You want to go after a really big problem? You want to start something internally? Don't wait. There is no better time than now. Thank you.